Don Schmitt, the key investigator in the Roswell case, believes that some preliminary examinations were done at the funeral home and at the military hospital. It was found the autopsies were performed at other military facilities too. This would be the first time that the armed forces of the United States had recovered bodies of intelligent, non-human alien beings, bodies that had been recovered in San Antonio from the crashed ships. Now they had irrefutable evidence in their possession that showed the presence of beings of unknown origin. For some, it was evident that the United States was in grave danger. The news had to be stopped and controlled, kept in the strictest secrecy, or otherwise it would cause national panic. Commander Jesse Marcel, head of intelligence for the 509th Bombers Group in Roswell, brought some of the materials back to his base for inspection.
And the very night that Marcel would return back from the debris field with his 42 Buick convertible full of debris, full of wreckage, the back seat, the trunk, he would wake his son, Jess Jr. and wife up, take them into the kitchen. And there he had wreckage. He had debris scattered all over the kitchen floor. Wanted them to see it before he took it all the way to the base. And it was there that Jesse Jr., examining one of the pieces, noticed some of the hieroglyphic-like symbology. And immediately, observed that, noticed that this was something that his father, had never seen anything like this before. And his father kept talking about pieces of a flying saucer, flying saucer crap.
Another serviceman, Colonel William Blanchard, Commander-in-Chief of the Roswell military base, was also a witness. Years later, his daughter would reveal what happened that night in 1947 in his house, where the Blanchard family lived.
Blanchard's daughter, Dale, describes that when her father came home late that night, that first night, that he was beside himself, that he, for being a big man, he played football, and there were little people, there were little men, and they weren't from here. And then he would say that they weren't from this earth. So the family described how when Blanchard came home, that this was something very unsettling, something that again defied conventional explanation.
Y muy pronto llegaría aquí el ejército de los Estados Unidos para recoger hasta la más pequeña pieza de lo que existía en este lugar.
This is the area that the military then would come to and spend about 3 days, 50 to 60 men, on hands and knees, shoulder to shoulder, picking up every last piece. As one of the MPs said to us, they were told, if it doesn't move, pick it up. And so there were trucks, and they would take sacks over their shoulders full of the material.
Why they had to pick every single piece?
Because they realized they had something extraordinary. It was something beyond their comprehension, and they wanted to make sure that they had every possible piece. Not only that any outside people would possibly discover, like us, but at that time, there were a lot of Soviet spies, especially given that the first atomic bomb was detonated just to the west of here. And so as a result, they were also making sure that none of it fell into enemy hands.
Everything that was recovered at the crash site, all the parts and bodies, were transferred by the United States Army to the P-3 hangar of Building 84, which in 1947 was known as the Black Hangar.
This is where we taxied the aircraft to load up certain cargo. This is where it all happened, this very hangar. This is where they took the remains of the ship and the bodies that were recovered north of Roswell in July of 1947.
In this hangar, where the atomic bomber planes from the Second World War were kept, bodies of alien beings were stored and examined. Bodies unlike any humans ever seen before. All the witnesses interviewed by Donald Schmitt and his research team were also there to be interviewed. They all claimed and supported the same story, that this case was authentic. It really happened. Truths that had been hidden for more than 60 years.
They saw two that were obviously dead and one that was alive and walking and talking.
He said that he went out and found that when they got there that he observed the crash site, a circular type ship crash site, and there was debris strewn everywhere, and that he had found 3 bodies. They had large heads on them, and at least one of them was still alive when they brought them back to the base.
He said, it happened. I was out there, I saw the crash site, I saw the spacecraft, and I saw the grays. And the grays was in reference to the color of the skin.
And some describe, for example, not only seeing areas where bodies were laid out with a canvas tarpaulin covering everything but the heads, but then off to the side, others would describe seeing an egg-shaped object, a pod, a capsule, about the size of a car. And then others would describe seeing areas of nothing but wreckage scattered, because they were actually attempting to reassemble, almost like a crash investigation, portions of this unknown object.
The materials classified in this hangar were moved to Fort Worth, Texas, on a flight that left this operations center.
In 1947, the very first flight that transported actual wreckage from the crash site came through this building, through this operations building. And that would have been Major Jesse Marcel, and the base commander, Colonel William Blanchard, was observed in this building as the men escorted in boxes, open boxes, actual replica as far as remnants from the crash, and came through a hallway, and there was a B-29 that taxied up, which was called Dave's Dream.
The bodies of the alien beings were moved to the restricted area. Joseph Montoya, the vice governor of New Mexico, observed these amazing beings recovered by the United States Army.
Was beside himself. He was distraught. He was upset. And all at once he went, they weren't human. They weren't human. You won't believe it. You won't believe it. And then later he would describe that he was taken into the hangar, and he was shown what he thought were children. And he heard one of them moaning, and its leg was rocking, its knee rocking back and forth. It was alive. And he saw that it wasn't human. And he became immediately upset. And get me out of here, get me away from here right away. And that's when he called for his friends to pick him up. And he would always warn them afterwards, if you ever repeat what I've told you, I will say you're a liar. I will say you're lying. And he would also warn them that I can't stop the FBI, I can't stop the government from hurting you. So he warned them never to talk about this again. So it was after he had passed away that they finally started to confide to us and repeat what he had originally told them, that they weren't human.
Today, thanks to witnesses who saw what happened in the hangar, as well as in the hospital, and the transferring of those bodies to the Wright-Patterson military base, we know what really happened. The witnesses decided to speak before they died and leave their testimony for the history books.
One of our first 10 witnesses, Eli Benjamin, who we describe in our book, Witness to Roswell, described how they were called and assigned to guard duty over at the hangar, Building 84. And then they were instructed to escort in ambulance trucks a number of gurneys, transporting a number of bodies to this very location. It was there as they were unloading, most likely from this area right here, that one of the MPs stepped on one of the sheets, pulling it away from one of the bodies on one of the gurneys, and it moved, and the eyes opened. And he saw that clearly, it wasn't human, that it was something, as he describes to this day, haunts him. He gets very emotional when he talks about it because he can't forget the face, and that clearly it was something beyond this planet, beyond our existence here.
Were these creatures hurt?
Some were described even at the crash site as being burned, as being mangled. Some were described as uninjured, almost peaceful, as in repose, as though, they were very serene even in dying. And the surviving one was described at some point even walking on its own or being brought in on a gurney. And then as the base administrator who worked in the hospital, his private secretary, Miriam Bush, described that when she was taken into an examination room here at this hospital facility, she was shocked. She thought they were children, again, based on the size of the outline under the sheets on the gurneys. And then she saw one of them move, and she saw again the larger head and the larger eyes. And it was something that affected her as well for the rest of her life.
From the military hospital, telephone calls were made to the only funeral home in Roswell, the Ballard Funeral Home, a call that was made 64 years ago. Glenn Dennis took the call but did not understand the unusual request made by the Army.
And Glenn's story was that at first the calls were as to the availability of child-sized caskets. Do you have any children's caskets? Okay, if that was believable. But then there were follow-up calls as to what type of chemicals could be used for the preservation of bodily tissue and bodily fluids.
On the next call, other requests were made, and Glenn Dennis was asked to personally visit the military hospital.
And that's when Glenn, entering the back of the hospital, encountered the nurse who warned him to quickly get out of there, that something had happened, that he shouldn't be there. And that's when he was accosted by the military, and that's when they made the comment to him about they'd be digging his bones out of the sand if he didn't keep his mouth shut about it.